Monday nights at about this time is when we get to check out what's happening in the United States with Annelise Nielsen, who is the Sky News United States correspondent, and she joins us now again from beautiful DC. How are you, Rockstar?
Good, and daylight savings means that the time gets better each week lately, so now it's 8:30, so you don't have to apologise for making get up early.
All right, excellent. Now, let's talk about such outrage about the state of Georgia wanting to introduce things like photo ID before you can get access to things like early voting or obviously absentee voting. Now, here in Australia, we find this a little bit weird, and certainly from my perspective, I find it fairly outrageous that many of the organisations that are kicking up a stink about these changes demand photo ID for access to the services of which they are pulling from the state of Georgia to protest the laws here. So can you tell me, what are they actually trying to change here?
Well, look, this has been an unprecedented election in the amount of early voting, the amount of voting generally. It was 66% turnout, which is way higher than we've ever seen any election. So this is a reckoning right across the country. One report had about 250 different bills changing voter laws across 46 states currently being presented, but this is really coming up in those swing states that were tight or went blue for the first time. And so this is why Georgia in particular has become a focus. What the Democrats have been saying is that this is deliberately to disenfranchise those African-American voters who came out, who normally don't come out. And to put that kind of restriction on these voters, they say is unfair, that you've registered to vote and so you should be able to come up with no kind of ID. Some of the challenges are that, especially in these lower income areas, it can be quite a distance to travel to a polling place, and they probably don't have access to the same kind of transportation that their wealthier counterparts would. And so this is where the cry comes out that it's Jim Crow era laws. But the Republicans have said we need to keep that security in the system, we need to keep that integrity in there, and that there were concerns just by the fact the number of audits they had to have and the questions that were raised. And so they want confidence in the system. What they do have is a very long lead up to registering for those absentee ballots. That's what they're really trying to restrict as well. And that's something that's kind of fallen by the wayside in the national conversation. But that's a really serious issue too. I mean, to have to register more than 2 months out is a pretty long lead up to know that you're going to be ready to vote. But what they're arguing is they want to make sure those ballots get in. They don't want people registering 2 weeks out, not getting it in time, and then just not voting at all. But then the other one's been this idea that they shouldn't have people from groups handing out free food at lines, because some of these lines do go for hours, people standing out there. And the idea is that if you have a lobby group handing out Chick-fil-A sandwiches, you might be actually kind of enticed to vote for them. The Republicans are saying, look, you can bring your own food, you can do your Uber Eats, you just can't take these freebies. But then it goes back into that Jim Crow discussion. So this is why it's had such national focus. Now you've got baseball boycotting the state and moving to Colorado, where they have their own issues too. This is not a perfect system in any state. So this is all part of that kind of post-election reckoning where a lot of stuff just simply didn't work last time.
But also, there's some common sense stuff, right? So when you talk about the food and water, when you've got to wait hours, it's ridiculous, of course, that you have to wait all that period of time. That's the thing worth fixing as opposed to anything else, right? And yes, the absurdity of 50 separate state elections, electoral systems running a federal election. Thank goodness we have the AEC. Sure, they might lose some ballots every now and then in Western Australia. Terrible addition, but still. And there was that revote, of course, in the Senate that took place there. But I'll take our system over theirs any day. But again, to me, the hypocrisy of companies like Major League Baseball that require photo ID to collect tickets to go to things like the All-Star game, then take the All-Star. It's like, hello, kettle. Anyway, now, Kamala Harris is supposedly the person who is the point person that old mate Swampy Joe, my nickname, not yours, has put in charge of the immigration issues that are happening right now at the border, but she hasn't been to the border and she doesn't really talk much about what's going on here. Is that because there's an elegant solution coming, or are they just planning to take the people out of the facilities as fast as possible and then put them on army bases where no one can take photos of them?
That's the thing, there is no solution coming, and it seems like this has been something of a poison chalice handed to her. And it's the same thing that Barack Obama did with Joe Biden, put him in charge of that border issue, and we know that didn't really resolve itself in that time either. And so it's kind of seen as someone has to cop it. They don't want Joe Biden wearing what's happening, and so they're going to give it to Kamala Harris. But the longer it goes that she doesn't go to visit, she's not given press conference in weeks, and when she's been given this task, that's something people want to hear answers about. And this is starting to play badly on both sides, because you've got these videos coming out of children wandering alone in the desert, going up to the Border Patrol officials in tears, saying that they've been abandoned and they just need to be looked after. You've got facilities that are overrun and schools opening up in those facilities while other states don't have their own students back at schools. And there's just kind of no point at which they can say that this will be fixed, because they're now looking at having to send more funding to countries to try and get them to manage it themselves in Central America. And it's not really something you can fix that quickly overnight. I mean, if you could fix all the systemic issues in south of the Texas border, I mean, you'd be home and host. But what they need to do is find a better way to process them and keep them out of these facilities where they're only supposed to be kept for 72 hours. And that's just a growing problem. And Kamala Harris really needs to try and manage this without being the face of not succeeding in managing it.
And surprise, surprise, breaking news, Donald Trump is still angry about the election.
Yeah. Yeah, he's spoken to Republican donors in Florida. It's still out whether it was a successful summit that he had with these supporters, because he's supposed to be bringing in money for the Republican Party. At the same time, he's just been using the opportunity to tear at all those Republicans he said didn't support him, mainly Mitch McConnell, who hasn't really returned to serve at all after, you'll remember when there was that original vote during the impeachment process. It was then that the then Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, now Minority Leader, tore into Donald Trump, saying he disrespected democracy, and that was really having it both ways, because he certainly didn't vote to impeach him either. And now he's just trying to make a small target, move on, shore up the Republican Party. But funding is where this matters. And what this shows is people are still turning to Donald Trump within the Republican movement. They are still listening to him. What we haven't seen is a real change in tack from Donald Trump. It's the same at the CPAC conference. We're hearing his greatest hits. We're not hearing a plan for what happens next. And what he's still doing is just holding that sword of Damocles over the Republican Party, saying, my supporters are still listening to me. I'm still mad. And they're going to have to really come to the table with him at some point, especially before midterms.
Well, and this is it. It's a primary system, and this is the thing. The places, the people that are in the super safe seats, it's the activist population that can decide who ends up being the candidate or not, which is exactly the same on the Democrat side. But this is what happens when you lose. This is what happens when you lose. Yeah. Annelise, lovely to talk to you, mate.